official episode of Spread the Bread. I'm Colton. I was late for the introduction last time, so now I gotta do it today. And all I gotta say is the boys and I were reading Lenin, and I'm staunchly in the middle between being an anarchist and a Marxist now, so both sides have to like me.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. That
Fucking
exempts me from any
centrist.
criticism. So, yeah, Neil, do you want to go into what we read?
Well, we're currently on the process of reading State and Revolution.
Emphasis on revolution.
And we're trying to kind of see why it's always the go-to throwaway when it comes to internet discourse. And by internet, I mean that stupid bird app called, where a lot of leftists throw this text called The State and Revolution when they're within the thread of Marxist-Leninism, and when it comes to anarchists, they throw around the bread book, which is, formally known as Peter Kropotkin's The Conquest of Bread. Now, there's this one specific tweet that made the whole fucking bird app explode because of its very, very nuclear levels of. I'm going to quote. This was a tweet made on 12th of April at around midnight, I think. And the take was Marxist-Leninists aren't communist. I'm going to repeat that one more time because it's goddamn hot. Marxist-Leninists aren't communists.
And that was from like a bread tuber, I believe, so...
Now, I personally do not think that take is valid, and I think it's pretty much fucking bait.
Yeah, it was totally bait. I think, when we're first looking at that tweet, she's saying that they're not communist, which, if we're talking about actually realizing communism as in a stateless classless society, then no one is communist, because it hasn't happened. But if we're talking about trying to achieve communism as that being the criteria to be labeled communist, then whether we agree or disagree with how Marxist-Leninists plan to get there, they're communist.
See, I think that that's very true because I feel like it was put out in bad faith. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, what was the point of what she was putting? I don't think it was to actually go into depth of do Marxist-Leninists really want a classless, stateless society? I think it's just kind of like let me see how many reactionary Marxist-Leninists I could get to respond angrily to. That did work, though. So
it did work, yeah. If you go into the thread, there's a lot of people throwing just really, really bad id poll into it, and id poll is somewhat like a very weird thing. But within this thread, it's just people calling the tweet out and just saying "Okay, Whitey" or a meme picture of just Lord Farquaad pointing at you saying "White."
Yeah, I think the problem is identity politics isn't necessarily bad, because I think they can be very helpful to kind of inform people on other people's experiences and what they deal with, like different minority groups and what have you. But the problem is when that gets weaponized in a dishonest way to basically invalidate what someone's saying, which, don't get me wrong, the take was bad, but just saying this is a white take isn't a good argument against what the person said. And what you saw in that tweet was a bunch of responses that weren't really arguing them. They were just either saying this is a white take, this is a privileged take, or oh, you're uneducated, which that one may be kind of accurate, but there was no actual rebuttal to what the person said other than calling them stupid, white, and I'm sure there's other insults that were thrown around that didn't really do much.
Yeah.
I think that reaction shows basically, the point of what she was trying to do, because ultimately, I think that saying that all Marxist-Leninists are communists is pointless and needlessly divisive. But if she's trying to point out that there are some Marxist-Leninists that aren't communist?
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the root point of that is okay. Like let's assume it is bait. So if we're talking about that, what she's saying is Marxist-Leninists are communists. It's wrong. But if we were to think about like, okay, so a lot of people who do identify as a Marxist-Leninist might not necessarily have like a solid grasp of what their ideology is already, and I don't know, maybe there's this like kind of a different take that maybe if we were to modify it a little, let's say Marxist-Leninists are communist, but some of them are teetering towards like, let's say, leftist centrism. Is that like a possible thing?
I definitely think so. I mean, I think when you look at people who are more state socialists, because I think that we're starting to get like a clearer distinction on the left between what people actually want. But I mean, people are just gonna naturally gravitate towards Marxist-Leninism a lot because it's the most prominent form of socialism. I mean, I think that like all of us tentatively identify as like being like in part of the libertarian left. What is the most prominent form of government that's been in the libertarian left, and how many people like just in the world know about that? Because it's very, very few.
Yeah, I can only think about 3 like groups. You have the group in Rojava, you have the CNTFE in Spain, you have that group in Mexico, but they're very small groups that aren't heavily talked about. So it's definitely harder to come to the conclusion of something like anarcho-syndicalism, libertarian socialism, anything like that as a possibility. And when we look at Marxist-Leninism, we actually, even if some of the socialist states we look at don't follow that correctly, they at least say they're inspired by that. So you end up having people being brought to that because that's the only thing they see socialism existing as, is by being Marxist-Leninist. Even if they aren't really Marxist-Leninist, like you can look at, China. But if you just want socialism, it's easier to be drawn towards Marxist-Leninism just because so many socialist, quote-unquote, countries identify as being like Marxist-Leninist.
Yeah, it's, I think, the most overwhelming example because, again, like, how many can we name off that still survives? And notwithstanding the argument that if it is a socialist country or it is not, there's still Cuba, there's still China, there's still Vietnam, and I'm pretty sure I'm missing a bunch more, but Laos. Like, yeah, Laos. And going back to, like, just the tweet itself when there's a bunch of people calling, the person what? There's, Jesus, there's a bunch of other people out there that will subscribe to being a Marxist-Leninist, and they're not necessarily... Oh, sorry, like, that was the argument against, like, anarchism, sorry.
Yeah, I think the thing that the one problematic thing with Marxist-Leninist being kind of the primary leftist ideology isn't that, like, I mean, I may have some disagreements with it, but my main problem with it is that people who identify as that aren't necessarily that. We were talking about commie-centrism, and I think that's what you see heavily in Marxist-Leninist, at least online and people I've talked to, is that they're not necessarily actually Marxist-Leninist. They're just kind of commie-centrist, and whatever is considered communist, they support. For instance, you have China, which is socialist with Chinese characteristics, or closer to like a very authoritarian market socialist sort of system, which isn't Marxist-Leninist, but Marxist-Leninist will defend that as if that's part of their ideology, which I find interesting because in the same sentence of saying that, they'll also write off something like the CNTFE saying that it was it didn't last long, so it doesn't count. So they don't have support for other leftist groups, but they have support for these authoritarian leftist groups that don't even subscribe to their ideology. And it's just kind of like, well, what are you trying to achieve?
I think it's being that authoritarian is what really leads them down that pathway, because I feel like we fundamentally think that people should be able to come onto things more on their own. I'm not suggesting that it's just like, oh, well, we just let everyone figure out to not be fascist, because that's definitely not how shit works. But I think that there's a lot of this puritanical, I know better in every sense of the manner, and basically there's a lot of critique of democracy that comes from the authoritarian left, and the problem is that it's not in the places that you would want to see arguments go against democracy.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because again, if we were to think about like how people would kind of just drift towards that ideology, it's valid somewhat, because again, like if you are an anarchist, I'm pretty sure if for example, I myself would find myself agreeing with other strands of like leftist ideology, because I think that they're critiquing that from a point of the leftist point of view. But it's just, I think that why a lot of like this term Marxist-Leninism is a catch-all, because it just somewhat espouses like this already existing state. It's comfortable. You know what it looks like. Then you just have to move it a little bit, just kind of tinker with it just a little, so it does not particularly espouse like just the what's it called, like the capitalist mode of production. You're just basically moving that state towards another form, which is just, instead of gearing it for profit, you're gearing it towards equality, so to speak. And I think like just the term itself has become a catch-all.
I think that that's true. I mean, I just think that we're seeing a lot of a lot of different like fractions of the left be shown right now, especially considering that Bernie endorsing Biden, that was a very polarizing move, especially around people that voted for Bernie.
I mean, people are acting like they weren't expecting that, but like that was definitely always going to happen if Bernie didn't get the nomination.
I just think it kind of came as like a punch in the gut. I mean, I don't think it's surprising though. So I think the idea of being surprised is a little bit it's delusional, but hey.
Yeah, I don't think it was surprising, but it is disappointing because Bernie really had nothing to lose this time. Last time, you can kind of make an excuse for it, going, well, if he runs again, next time, you don't want this baggage of not endorse. Like, basically, they'll pull the whole, well, he didn't endorse Hillary, so he endorsed Trump. And then that could hurt his chances of, like, if he ran again. But he's not going to run again. And if, at least I hope for his sake he doesn't run again.
I think that part of it, though, is that, I mean, and it makes sense when you listen to what Bernie said. I think he really thinks that Donald Trump being the president is the greatest threat to America. And to be fair, I kind of understand the sentiment. He really sucks, but I think it's that really causes him to do that in this instance, because I'm pretty certain that Bernie Sanders would much prefer as unfortunate it is, he'd rather have his friend Joe in the office than fucking Trump. Like, I think that he sees that difference, and I mean, there's a lot of leftists who don't see the difference as being enough in order for them to vote for him. And you know what? I can't really say that I blame them.
Yeah, I don't really blame them. That's just kind of why I wish. I mean, I knew he would do it, but I was kind of hoping it'd be a just sort of a last stand kind of thing, going like, kind of splitting the left from like the neoliberals, kind of being like, we're not the same thing. And him doing that, it kind of just goes, oh, we're gonna fall in line with you guys, you know, which
The left.
go ahead.
It's okay. Sorry. I think that the left is this kind of. It's a lot looser of a coalition than the right is, and I mean the right is. They have like a lot of different views of that. I mean, you have. I mean, I think that more people that identify as libertarian probably vote for the Republican Party than the Democratic Party, but like. I would also say that more people on would probably identify as libertarian right than libertarian left, even because it's more common. I mean, the Libertarian Party, as it is a fundamentally right wing idea.
Yeah, I believe they have a. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think they have a Libertarian Socialist Caucus, but it's got like no one in it.
I think that's right.
I think Gravel, he identified as libertarian at one point. I don't know if he was involved with that caucus, but I looked into that and I know they have a Libertarian Socialist Caucus, but no one's in it. It's empty.
Well, how do we feel then? Because like that's like the polarizing aspect of what happened. Because a bunch of people were already saying, like, I think we agree that this was going to happen. Even Bernie himself said that he will support the nominee even if it wasn't him. It was going to happen, and it is a gut punch. But for the people out there who are already saying that, well, you know what, like, I'm still not going to vote for Biden, is it like the beginning of like at least like an ideological grounding for a lot of these people? Because that's great, but at the same time, you still have the election to think about.
I think that it will probably, and I think that it could end up swinging the election. And I think that you'll see more consequences come from that than maybe anything else. That's just how I feel, because I feel like if you get Donald Trump to be in office again, and let's say that, I don't know who the Republicans would pick, but let's say that the Democrats pick like a Kamala Harris, like some really, really boring centrist candidate, I think you might really start seeing like a continuous loss by the left, because they will have isolated the progressive left so much that they might not see a difference in voting Democrat or Republican because they see it as fundamentally the same, which will cause encroachment by the right, which will either cause some sort of like gain by the left, or you're just going to see the right rule for a very long time. And unfortunately, with the rising authoritarianism in the Republican Party, I think that we might be really likely to see that happen.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a risk. There is one thing that I really don't like that Bernie did just recently. I don't know if y'all saw it, but he came out and he said it would be irresponsible to not vote for Biden. And I get his sentiment, but I think, like, in a weird way, he should understand the coalition he built and kind of understand that them voting for Biden is a hard bargain to sell, and then coming at them and telling them they're just being irresponsible is definitely not the way to do that. I think it'd be better to put pressure on Biden to adopt at least some sort of progressive policy instead of coming at the people who he needs to be trying to reach to gain their votes.
I think that highlights the whole like, slap in the face aspect that we were kind of talking about, because like in his video announcement where he like withdrew his candidacy, he was saying he was suspending his campaign, but he was still urging people to go out and vote for him so you could have leverage over Biden at the convention. But even then, he's just basically saying that that was all bullshit by like coming out and nominating him sooner.
Yeah. I don't like the fact that he came out and told people that they were just going to be irresponsible instead of trying to push for Biden to win these people's votes. I think... Go ahead.
I think he just sees that... He sees a really distinct difference between the Democrat president and Republican president. I know... I've been I've been thinking the distinction's quite a bit less. I think that there is a difference, and I think that there is a real difference, but I think when you look at it ultimately, the change that you see is it's a little too superficial for a lot of people in the Progressive Party to deal with. I mean, because they go, it's really easy to go like, I mean, what's the fucking point of me voting anyways? Like, if you don't live in a swing state, you're really not likely to vote because you're just like, oh well, I live in a plus 60 Democrat or Republican district, so if I vote opposing that, it doesn't even count because of the way that our democratic system works.
So can we say that instead of like just I wouldn't say like capturing like the people within it. Maybe it has to deal with the fact that the cultural landscape has to change. That
Like, do you mean what do you mean? Elaborate a little bit.
like just I don't know. I lost my train of thought. That was
Were you going on like trying to say that you kind of need, like I guess for me, Bernie not making it, kind of shows that the overall mindset of Americans just isn't quite there yet. So I think we kind of need to focus on pushing people that direction instead of trying. Like, yes, we should work to try to get people elected that hold our positions, but we really need to start convincing people over to our positions more than just bullying them and telling them our guy's going to win, because obviously our guy didn't win. And I think that just shows that we're not as big as we think we are yet. And I think that's something we really need to work on.
I really... Oh, you got it.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say like, okay, so we're postulating that is it true then? Like, can we assume that like Bernie didn't win just because it wasn't there yet, right? Like,
I would say that there's been a lot of suppression of voting of people from Bernie, but I think that when you look at it, there's an overwhelming amount of people that were voting for not Bernie than Bernie, and he wasn't gonna be able to get half of the delegates. And if he would have done that, I think technically they could have not given the nomination to him, but that would be super fucked up on the DNC's part. But again,
I think if he would have won a majority, they wouldn't have taken it from him, just because I think what the DNC cares about even more than continuing this neoliberal shithole is keeping at least some state of power. And in social democracy, there's still places of power to be like had. So I think if he would have gotten the majority, they probably would have just rolled with it. If he would have gotten the plurality though, yeah, no, there's no way he would have. He had to get the majority. And we couldn't do that.
I think that the reason why Bernie's not going to win is because ultimately there are more capitalists than there are non-capitalists in this country. And that could be for a variety of reasons. I mean, we've had non-stop capitalist propaganda since basically the inception of this country, so again, it's like I don't necessarily blame people for having been indoctrinated. I guess the problem is that when you see people that are just blatantly lying about these systems in order to propagate them, like that's how I feel about like someone like Ben Shapiro. Like I feel like Ben Shapiro isn't misguided or ignorant. I feel like he just like in bad faith actively tries to misrepresent the way that things are.
Oh yeah, he's a total grifter. I mean, he is like intellectually dishonest. But you even see it whenever he debates people, where he can't even really take their arguments head on. He constantly has to build a straw man to then belittle and then have his followers, rag on whatever he's attacking as well. Where it's not even arguing anymore. It's almost just like bullying someone's idea into suppression by misrepresenting it and then mob attacking it. He's very intellectually dishonest. You see that with a lot of people on the right, especially in like influential spaces like on YouTube and things like that.
Yeah, there is a big growing, I guess, tendency for these pseudo-intellectuals to appear like they are talking a bunch of logically sound arguments. But again, he's a grifter. Like, you can see multiple times where he just builds a straw man just so he can attack it. And he also gallops a lot of the times when he goes from one point to the second point without even any slight bit of correlation.
Well,
And I mean, that happens too, like, when it comes to like fucking Twitter arguments. Like, I mean, Twitter isn't the world, but like, there is this sort of like pseudo-intellectualism going, like, for everyone.
yeah, speaking of that pseudo-intellectualism, let's not forget that these people also like to use really big words that people don't understand in order to sound smarter so people will listen to them. Like Jordan Peterson going on about, postmodern neo-Marxist and things like that, where it sounds catchy and it's big, and obviously now I think Jordan Peterson knows more than I do, for sure, so I should believe everything he has to say. And all of them do this, and that's how these people, especially the libertarian right, I think they're so confused, but I think a lot of them like pride themselves on being these free-thinking intellectuals that they get sucked into this, like just using big words and saying that you're using facts and logic, even if you're not, because that's just is how they want to argue, and they think that that's what these people are actually doing. In reality, they're just strawmanning and then saying that they're doing that.
I think that you see like a lot, especially with government systems that like are prevalent. You just see a lot of people just gravitating towards like the general idea of this because they're obsessed with it. Like it's the biggest part of their identity. Like, I want this even if this isn't the right thing. Like, there are people that would probably vote for fucking like fascists if it just had a hammer and sickle on it. Same way I think that people would vote for certain things just if it had like a certain religious veneer to it. I mean, people are sheep.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think just going back to the conversation earlier, then, like, let's assume Bernie, Bernie didn't win because we weren't there. So what's the route that we should be taking? Should we be trying to actively change the culture in a sort of way? That's the thought I lost earlier. So how are we supposed to change the culture somewhat, just so it edges a little bit further to, like Bernie being able to win? Like, is it through managing to argue against these pseudo-intellectual takes? Or is it just by, making memes online?
Well, I think you have different approaches depending on who you're trying to win over. If we're trying to win over a lot of, like, neoliberal types, wine mom types, you can't really, like, bully them into coming to your side, which, I mean, it's kind of hard to do sometimes, because sometimes they say something really stupid. But I think you have to kind of lead them there themselves. Same thing with the libertarian kind of right. You kind of have to plant seeds when you're talking to them for them to think of on their own to help them kind of come to their own conclusions. Because I've discovered a lot of people don't like to be told what to think. They want to think that they got there themselves. So you kind of have to ask them questions that get them to come to, like, our conclusions in a way. The things that we've thought about. I do think there are people who do deserve to be intellectually bullied, though. Don't get me wrong. I think people who are fascist, you can't convince a fascist over. And if the fascist has followers, the best thing you can do is belittle that fascist, because that is what fascists like. They like power grabs, so I think you have to, like, have that power struggle against fascists to convince people who are, like, falling into that alt-right pipeline to come around. You see a lot of people on YouTube that I watch that are like this. That do exactly that. And then you have, but I think with most people, other than those rare cases, we have to kind of give them the seeds to get them to come here themselves, instead of like telling them, well, my guy's better because your guy sucks and he's a rapist. As much as that may be true, that is not going to cause them to think about their positions and come over. It's going to make them double down on their positions and dig their heels in, and literally go against you just because you said they were wrong.
Yeah, definitely. To quote, like, our favorite anarcho boy, Urruti, he says that al fascismo no se le discute, se le destruye, which means you do not discuss fascism. Now, I think there is a route too. If we look at like how there's these pop culture icons or just pop culture products out there, like movies, for instance, or what's it called, like TV series, like we can actually use that to discuss like some of these ideals that we follow. Like, for example, I was thinking about like the Batman series by Nolan, like 2008. There was a lot of discussion about how 2008 affected the thing. Like, if you think about like why Bane shows up into the what's it called, like the Wall Street stand-in for the movie, and like there's this one scene where he, like, this guy tells him, "Why are you here? There is no money here." And then Bane replies, "Then why are you here?" And one of the most recent ones we can see is like Money Heist or La Casa de Papel, where they talk about like if the banks are being injected with liquidity, why is that not stealing, but us stealing from the bank and injecting liquidity to these people who are normal people like I am? Why is that not thievery? Like, there's this sort of like slowly growing idea within these pop culture references or just media that's just slowly creeping into this form of like criticism against just our liberal perspective. And one of the main things, I think, like the main takeaways of that is Parasite. Like, some people are just gonna view it as like, oh, like it's a movie, but then for the people who are somewhat paying attention or not even paying attention, the seed is there. Hey, look at this inequality. It sucks, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think in like pop culture stuff, like movies and stuff, it's helpful there. And I also think just some of us who can educate people should be trying to. I think that's kind of like the point of this podcast, for instance. And we've all talked about writing things and whatnot and trying to publish that out there. And I think that that's what a lot of leftists need to do. If they're serious about a leftist movement, they need to be creating something to educate people, to convince them to come over. I mean, basically, we need to make propaganda. And I know propaganda has a negative connotation, but really all propaganda is educating people and trying to convince them. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to be doing that basically more than anything else right now, because we need that cultural shift to even get into social democracy. And this election was a perfect example of why we need to do that. Because we're not going to win through just brute force. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's how you get anything. I mean, the only way to get a change that will last is to fundamentally change the pillars of society. I mean, this can go to any progressive movement that you can think of. Some people might think that the world isn't getting more progressive, and I surely think that there are some ways in which we definitely have not, and we have regressed slightly, but maybe not slightly. We've regressed in a couple of ways as time has gone on, evidently. But I think that when you see, like, even, like, things that happened a long time ago, major, like, looking at, like, civil rights, looking at, like, the Civil War, looking at, like, the Revolutionary War, I mean, things seem to get better and better, and people gain more and more rights, and I think it's about just being able to change it to where, people are finally going, maybe slavery shouldn't happen. Maybe we should let black people vote. Maybe gay people should be able to get married. It's just like we're at a point where we want democracy, yet we're not really okay with the results of what happens, even though we live in a deeply, deeply flawed democratic place. I think that if the will reflected the will of the people more right now, I don't think it would look as different as we might think that it would.
Yeah, I agree. I think as much as like maybe someone could argue the Democratic Party is a little bit more left than what Joe Biden is, overall I would say our culture is more neoliberal, and that is why the candidates that lasted a long time were either neoliberals or you had someone who was like in between, like Warren, for instance, who was in between sort of Bernie and the neoliberals. How they lasted quite a while. And I mean, yes, Bernie lasted a good while as well. I mean, he was one of the last two. The fact that all of these people still had support, and it wasn't until they dropped out that they all rallied behind Biden, just shows that they're closer to neoliberalism than they are to social democracy, and that it's just where the people are currently, and we have to just educate them, because I think they've just been misguided and they don't understand some of the bigger problems here. Like, you have a lot of people who see Trump as the main problem, and I think, yeah, Trump is a problem, but there's other problems that need to be talked about that I think a lot of these people either are disaffected by and therefore don't know about them or think about them, or they just don't really care. And I think if we can educate them and kind of get some sort of empathy out of them, we can have that shift finally.
Yeah, and mostly, like, we need to stop trying to punch left to, like, with going back to the first week. We gotta stop that. Because, again, like, how are we all be able to somewhat propagate the idea that, like, hey, there's an alternative solution to this hellscape that we live in? And, again, like, going to the fact that, like you said, it's not very palpable for someone to be taught how to think. It's more so that they have to come to it on their own terms. And again, like, if we're talking about, like, just leftist factionalism, there has to be a point where we kind of, one, stop just arguing in bad faith, because, you know, like, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people out there that are just, like, spreading all these just attacks on the different, like, threads of leftism, like, oh, do you think anarchists deserve rights, or, oh, look, like, or maybe we can, like, for the anarchists to stop calling, like, every ML a fascist, because, like, again, like, it's, both of those aren't great and true. This factionalism is pretty gross, because, again, like, the right's pretty much conglomerated and solid. Now, for us, like, it just doesn't appear to be the case, because we're busy shitting on each other.
Yeah.
Some of the things that we quarrel over are pretty fucking trivial. I mean, you know, we get into these really deep arguments of specific ways that a state or should or shouldn't be implemented, and we're not able to get things that, like, are part of public opinion, like getting big money out of politics, which is a vaguely, like, liberal idea within itself, or even, like, getting, like, marijuana legalized on a federal level.
Yeah, I think the thing is, a lot of what the, like, libertarian left and authoritarian left argue about are a bunch of theoreticals currently. I mean, we can't really, yes, we can debate these things if we just want to have an intellectual conversation, but in reality, these things don't matter yet, because we don't even have universal healthcare. I mean, we have so many problems that we need to fix first before we can even talk about what we want to do to either create a revolution and what direction we want to go with that. We need to move to the point that we don't have, where basically people are more taken care of to even be able to mobilize to have this revolution that we all talk about and that we argue about how to have. We can't, sure, we can argue about that all day, but that's not going to happen until you have a support system of people, like I would say, through some sort of social democracy, or the people can be mobilized enough to even think about doing the things we're talking about.
Yeah, like, this idea of spontaneity has to be left alone for a bit, because even now, like, you see, just, for example, us, we're making a podcast over some leftist ideas, because why not? Like, that's going to contribute slowly. There's others with the mutual aid, like we mentioned with the first episode, and now it's spontaneity. People are just doing it because they feel like it is what is necessary. So if we were to stop talking about, like, just how the revolution is going to, you know, come about, and I personally think that the revolution will come about in a spontaneous action, not in a structured thing, because all these revolutions are never, ever planned, but only as, like, an explosion of all these ideas all together. Now, like, if that were the case, like, maybe we should start, you know, building dual power, because how I see it is, now there's holes appearing in, like, just within the United States. There's holes where when people can't afford to pay their rent, there's some people out there that are lending money. There's some people who are spreading food, spreading the rent. There's people out there making their own media like we are doing here, because there's tiny little holes appearing in it. Like, there's tiny little holes appearing in the system, and once you keep scrubbing those little holes, they get bigger and bigger. Now, I personally think that, like, it's not going to happen, like, soon, but the more we work at it now, the better it's going to come out for later.
Do you think that we should still work within the confines of electoralism? I mean, I know that on a technical level, we all think that we probably shouldn't, but what about given the means that we have? Because that's the thing, it's like, we can all talk about social revolution, but I don't know. It takes a type of organization that hasn't happened historically here.
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at with, I mean, as much as we want things that are things that can't just get done through electoralism, we have to focus on that to some extent, because we have to make it easier on people to get involved with the organizations that want to, have some sort of revolution. Right now, people are so worried about even being able to pay their bills. The last thing they care about is what some leftist is saying about revolution. They want to get food on the table. If you want this revolution to happen, you have to make it where people have... Basically, I'm going against, like, the complete opposite of accelerationism. I think you have to make it easier for people to get involved with these things. And we can only do that, basically, through... I mean, yes, we should still educate, we should still be organizing, we shouldn't stop those efforts. But we do have to focus on electoralism in order to liberate the people enough to come to us, to have the time to come to us and learn and get, and start organizing with us. If they're too focused about having to work so many hours to feed their kids or feed themselves or pay this bill or get out of debt, the last thing they're going to think about is changing society completely. They may think about it, but actually doing it isn't going to be the first thing on their list, because they're like, man, I got kids to feed. Like, those things are going to come first. Those needs are.
Yeah, acquiring the bread is first priority. And, I mean, to answer the question, I think local, like, when it comes to electoralism, I think local elections do still have, like, a movement to be... everyone should be somewhat supportive, because, again, like, the local is going to be the one that's going to affect you mostly, because that's where your community is. That's where you start to mingle with the other people that might be susceptible to the ideas that we are espousing. But when it comes to anything other than that, I don't think there is such use for it anymore.
Uh-oh. Any comments, guys? Colton?
I think that's fair.
Colton, are you there?
Yeah, my signal is weak, so...
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we just have to...
I agree with your take, though. Oh, what's up?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I agree with your take, though, that, like, in order to, like, really, like, spread any sort of leftist message, like, you have to, like, put it in means that people understand. And then, like, I can't tell you how many people I've personally talked to, like, throughout, like, quarantine and throughout, like, not even using air quotes whenever I say pandemic, but, like, it's just kind of shocking just to see, like, how people are still, like, absorbed within, like, the reality that we're in, and how, like, they still think that, like, the system as it exists, will work. But,
Yeah, I think it's difficult, because what you're asking people to do, especially when you're on the left, is think of a system that I mean, is almost theoretical, like they don't exist in. They have to think of a whole entire system that they would live in. And that takes a lot of, like, kind of education and guidance to quite understand how things would work so differently. And for someone to be able to put the effort to know that and know enough about it to want to be an advocate for it, you have to kind of make their day-to-day life easier where they can spend time on that. I think that's just one of the biggest things, and I think that's why when leftists say we have to completely give up on electoralism, I think it's dumb. I honestly think it's stupid. Because we can't afford to.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I don't think like we're at that point anymore because at least when it came to Spain, everyone was sort of under the Sanete kind of thing already. Like they already were conscious of like what they were trying to achieve. Like here, it's bare bones. It's the minimum of most minimum that like there is no possibility of like pushing or imposing the will of like the worker on any sort of thing. Like that's why like I think I agree. There should be a building first before anything happens because the root of that is we can't just let go of electoralism at this point. It's too early. We don't have a position.
Yeah, we need to at least help people through that process to the point that they can, learn some things, and then from there we can really try to have a shift left and kind of guide people to their own liberation. But people have to have the means to be able to be guided to their own liberation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just like with the things you're saying, go check out the Bread book because a lot of anyone who's listening, go check out Kropotkin's Conquest of Bread because that's what he's saying. The very first thing that must be achieved is to be able to have the necessities first before any talk of like the revolution is to happen.
That's why I think that partly the revolution kind of won't happen because part of us is like super past that. I mean, there's so many people in this country that live like pretty decent middle class life, and a middle class life in America is pretty decent as far as like the whole world goes, as is middle class life in most developed countries. So I think that you're gonna need to see something pretty crazy happen. And I mean, to be fair, we are living in circumstances that are pretty fucking crazy, if I had to admit so. I think that you're gonna have to see some really big change in order to see revolution happen, at least on like any scale similar to what we've seen in like recent modern history.
Yeah, we really got to work on. I'm very convinced the number one thing we need to be focusing on, no matter how this election turns out, is just education. I can't stress that enough, that people need to be educated. We need to guide them, like I was saying, to their own liberation. We have to tell them what's wrong, get them to see it. Because when you live in like what we live in now, you kind of just get used to how things are, and you kind of overlook the problems. So we need to point out the problems to these people, show them solutions to these problems, and then get them on board to help us make those solutions come into reality.
So I'm gonna drop a hot take real quick. So do you think that's what the Vanguard Party is supposed to achieve instead of imposing, or sorry, not the word, I'm sorry, my comrade MLs, but like just guidance instead of the takeover of a Vanguard Party? Do you think that's like the synthesis of this?
Yeah, so that's what I was talking about. I think, was that in Discord that I brought that up? What I was talking.
Me and you were talking about that. I don't know if all of us were on.
Okay, I know me and Alex were for sure talking about it. Where I was basically bringing up, like, the Vanguard Party as a party coming in and taking control of the state, and kind of shoving socialist ideas down people's throats isn't going to work. I see that is going to turn into what we don't want, which will be a forceful, violent revolution, most likely, which we've talked about why that's not a good idea. There's a lot of resources that cannot be afforded to be mismanaged, like I think what we brought up, nuclear things and things like that. And I also just think that we'll end up having a lot of death of the people that we would want to be liberated through that process, and possibly the whole revolution die out and go the opposite direction. So what I think the Vanguard Party should be is sort of a theoretical group of people who are out educating people to basically lead them to their own liberation, as I was saying before, through basically guidance.
Like, how do you lead people? Because I'm pretty sure that there's gonna. I think the thing is that we're struggling with like how to institute some sort of like system that isn't too reminiscent of a state, isn't too oppressive. So that way we can, actually institute the people's will. But I guess the people can exert their will collectively, but it's going to have to be shown on some level because, I don't know, it's kind of like the de facto state problem that I run into a lot.
Yeah, well, I think that what I mean is we need to get people, like, to jump onto these ideas, and then from there we can talk about how we actually end up getting these ideas implemented, which would be either through, like, I don't know, you could see, like, maybe a general strike where everyone just stops working until these things get changed, or maybe the route is through electoralism, where we have a shift in culture and we do elect people who reflect that culture. I can't quite explain how we would have that change, but I know the only way we're going to have that change is by this theoretical Vanguard Party basically being a bunch of us leftists convincing other people to come join us over here through education.
Yeah, and no, just to piggyback off of that, like, once I think that that goal has been sufficiently achieved, again, like, the people are spontaneous. Once the proletariat has awakened this sort of consciousness, because, again, like, small ideas, and then, like, once they have been somewhat conscious, it's going to spread like a wildfire, and they're not going to need any more just leadership, so to speak, because they will know what needs to be done. Like, I don't know if I brought this example in the first podcast, but like, if a person who knows how to build a car, or no, sorry, like, if a person who is already in this industry, they will know what to do. Now, the problem with just the proletariat is they just don't understand how it works. Now, once they have achieved this sort of consciousness, they will know what their labor is, and their labor is to overthrow it. Now, by then, like, when everyone else understands that, there won't be a need for like this, like, a figure on top of it all. They know what needs to be done. They are not stupid. They are not like servile. We know this. It's all just gonna end up spontaneously because they already know what they need to be done. It's just they need to be led into it. Not leaders.
Say that again?
No, sorry. Like, what I was gonna say is, like, there is no need for a leader once everyone is on the same plane.
Well,
I think what he's trying to say is, like, have leaders who are basically educating people to the point that they are leaders themselves.
Yeah, that makes it way better. Yeah, well put.
I mean, I guess that's fair, but I don't think that the Vanguard part. I just feel a little iffy because I'm not sure the role of it after a certain point, but I do see the role of some sort of like. See, that's my thing. Is that like? Is there no? I see the Vanguard Party as some sort of like institutor of like the new state or the de facto state, whatever it is that's supposed to wither away.
Yeah, because I think, like, once, like, that like the Vanguard Party has ushered in this sort of consciousness, that, like, push for the proletariat that has opened the consciousness, they will do it on themselves. They will know what the withering of the state looks like. Because, the first and primary thing that they're going to think about is, like, how do we feed ourselves? How do we house ourselves? It's not going to be like, well, how do we organize the state first? They're going to maintain the needs first and then think about what happens later. Because again, like, what's the primary thing that has to be met? Food. And they'll figure it out eventually. Like, we could probably nudge them like a little bit to this path or a little bit to this path, but I don't think there should be a few groups of people up in the top like dictating, because again, like, it's top that, like, it has to be bottom.
I don't
Bottom
think
up.
that they would. I don't think that they would be dictating. I think that you would have people who enact the people's will. Like, they're not enacting. Like, they're carrying it out.
Yeah, well, that kind of makes me think of like what I was saying with once the people have this shift, that you could either see this through one of the examples I said was like electoralism. Even if we have problems with it, if you have this shift, they would be electing people that would represent them, that would be your socialist people, and I guess you could say that in itself would be the same sort of vanguard party that Marxist-Leninists talk about. But instead of them just coming and overthrowing the government, it's more the cultural shift puts them in the government. If that makes any sense.
I think there's a real question about how you organize society after post-capitalism. Because you want to make sure that the system that you implement is worse than what preceded it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that would be a great undertaking too. Still, I think that would also go beyond the bounds of like just one country, because the argument would come about to like, yeah, like let's say we establish some sort of like post-capitalist society in one state. You're still surrounded by the sea of capitalism. But I think like, yeah, like that should be a discussion far more suited for like a little bit more discussion than we have now.
I mean,
because we're about to reach the end of like an hour.
I think we're okay. We can keep talking. As long as we still have stuff to talk about.
Okay. So we cut that out?
No, that's good. We'll be fine.
doesn't matter.
But, what were you gonna say, Alex? You were gonna say something. I thought.
I don't exactly know. I think it wasn't something in reference to Neil said.
Yeah, I mean, I think how exactly we have a government structured, because there will be some sort of governance. It's something that needs to be talked about, but overall, I do think the revolution won't be just a group of people basically overthrowing the government and instituting basically socialist policies. I think you have to have basically the people become socialist overall.
Well, I mean, I think that if you have people be the socialists, that would naturally happen. I don't know if that's the only avenue to get to socialism, but that certainly would be an easier way.
Yeah.
Because I think that, like, especially like from what I remember from reading I haven't read as much as I should have, but I'll finish it soon. But in State and Revolution, Lenin kind of makes the contention with a lot of like anarchist theories that once you have like a proletarian revolution in which there is a proper dictatorship over the bourgeoisie, it's basically that the state has been abolished, and what's been instituted after that, while it can be construed as a state, it's so fundamentally different that we shouldn't treat them as the same and as having the same inherent weaknesses and ways of oppressing people. But even if you wanted to call that a state, that will gradually wither away within itself. Now, to be fair, Lenin wrote that in 1917, and I mean, the state did gradually wither away, but that's because it turned into a capitalist state.
Yeah,
it withered away in a different kind of conception, I think, that he was thinking of.
Yeah, I think there is some sort of problems with that I have. I think it's an interesting idea, but I think the problem is if you still have that sort of authority there, you kind of run into the problem where those people, depending on who ends up taking the place, because people are going to take power during that time, like people are going to leave and you're going to have to replace them over time. And even if we say that's not a state as we imagine it now, I mean, in a sense, it's still kind of a state, and I don't see how those people who have power in that possibly...
Well, where would their power derive from?
What do you mean?
Like, in this new system, where would their power derive from? Because I understand where the leaders of now, I understand where their power is derived from. But I feel like they would have a fundamentally different power system. So it'd be harder for the Vanguard Party. Now, it depends on how you institute it. Obviously, we've seen how it can be instituted incorrectly. But I think that there's a way where basically you can kind of, you can prevent people from doing that.
I guess my worry is, would these people still have, like, for instance, military force and things like that? Because in the end, that is what would be power over people. Maybe not in the same sense that we have in our government, where capital is the main thing that's power over people, but...
The military force would be a problem, potentially, but if you had something more akin to, like, I don't know, like a military of the people, which, I don't know, that might just be a fancy thing, then you don't maybe have to worry about that military. The real reason why these things are enforced are because of the police and the military. Now, I would say at this point it's more so because of the police and the military, because I think that I think that if we had gone through a revolution, I think we're going to be because if we'd be post-revolution, I think that we'd be a lot less worried about the military potentially taking action, and it might be the police. But I don't know. I'll have to think about that.
I guess I'm lumping kind of the police and the military. Basically, I'm just thinking of armed force that the state would still have.
I see them as fundamentally the same side of force, just on different ends.
Yeah, which is what I'm thinking about, because that's still force. I mean, that's still, like, say that whoever's in that position does something that the people fundamentally disagree with.
Well, it depends on how they have access to these forces.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. I guess there's more nuance to it, but
for example, let's say that you have, like, some sort of representative government, because that's what I think would probably happen. I just feel like you wouldn't be able to, post-revolution, institute some of the problems that we run into here, because I feel like that's why we have the revolution. Like, maybe it's like, maybe we can't even use military force unless XYZ happens, and, you know, I don't know. That is the problem.
I think just the worry is whenever you have this Vanguard Party come into existence, you're giving so much power to them with the faith that they're not going to go against the things that got them there in the first place.
Well, I mean, you know, when you go to a hospital, you gotta hope that the doctor is trying their best to heal you, not just, like, I don't know, either do the least amount of work possible and make the most money, but you're really up to their expertise. I think that at the heart of it, it's that we need some form of a state, because there are things that will happen that communities will just not be able to deal with on a really small scale, even if you have this really interconnected community. And then at what point, what difference does that have with a government or a state? Because for example, this pandemic. I mean, this pandemic shows that you need to be able to have some sort of apparatus that is large enough in order to do things like we're doing to slow down the pandemic. I think that we should be as anarchist as possible, but it's like, you know, even though we wither away the state, we're still gonna have taxes, you know, right? Like, I don't think that taxes stop, and I think that in that case, whatever your de facto government is, or state, I think you should just try to wither it away as most as possible.
Yeah, I guess just what my worry is, you said something about it being possibly republic, which I think I'd be fine with. I'm just worried about it being basically some sort of like dictatorship sort of thing where the people are so far away from it that they don't really have control over it.
I think that the problem is that you're going to have to see a relinquishment of control over some things, because do you think that we should be voting on like what we should be doing in response to the pandemic? Because I certainly don't think so.
No, I'm not saying that there aren't some things, but I'm saying overall, though, I think people should have more power.
I feel like because those things exist, you kind of have to have it overall. Because if you want to like curb them to a certain point, they're not going to be able to do things like that. This is just the only thing.
I don't think you understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that the state wouldn't have any power at all. I'm saying that if it had complete power with no say of the people...
I'm not misunderstanding you, Noah. I get what you're saying.
So you'd be fine with like a totalitarian state?
Did I suggest that?
That's what it sounds like.
How did I think that sounded like that there needs to be some form of a state, because it needs to be big.
Yeah, and I was saying that the people should have some sort of say over that state. I'm not saying that they should be able to control everything the state does, but there should definitely be some sort of say from the people, which is what I was saying.
Yeah, of course. This is within the context of like a post-revolution that's focusing on that, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying, which is why I said I think you were misunderstanding me.
No, like I get that.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm still digesting that. Because...
Yeah, I'm just trying to...
It's... I don't know. Because again, like, if we were to have, like, a form of government that, like sure, like, there has to be some sort of institutions that, you know, like, that have to react to some sort of pandemic. It doesn't necessarily have to be under, like, some sort of, like, an idealist state. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, you got it.
No, like, maybe some sort of, like, just organization-wise, like, I guess, like, if what I'm trying to, like, get at is, like, is there, like, a separation between, like, what a state is versus a government? Because they're, like, just free, free association is a form of government, right? But it doesn't necessarily have a state.
I don't think that people ultimately have, like, free association. Like, you just kind of, like, come into being in a place, and then that's where you are. Like, you don't, like, voluntarily choose to be there. Maybe that's, like, besides the point, though. Just because I think that when you think of a state or a government, maybe they're different, because I'm thinking of a state more as an apparatus than the way that the state is implemented and works now. Because I think you need some sort of, like, I don't know, I don't want to say external, but you need some sort of organization that does and fulfills the principles of government that we agree need to be done. We need to have things like fire departments. I don't think that any of us really are in disagreements of it. I think the problem is that we have an issue with calling it the state, and we historically have had an issue with the government. The problem is that we do need these things that the government provides. I think that there should be, not just for, like, emergencies like the pandemic or fires, but, like, there should be healthcare. I think that healthcare should be exclusively ran without an incentive for profit, because, I mean, you'll get the most amount of people healthy.
No. It is very loaded. Like, the whole thing is very loaded.
I think the difference between a government and a state is the consent aspect. I think most people give consent to have a fire department and have healthcare. I think it comes to things when you have, like, I don't know, use the example of being spied on by the government that isn't consensual, that is considered the state. It's basically non-consensual government.
Yeah, but I mean, it's I don't think that makes like a difference between the state and the government.
But I believe that is basically what is considered the difference.
Well, but I mean, I just don't. What's the difference? Where's the separation between the state and the government? Because what would be the difference between the overarching state of the United States or the federal government? Because I feel like the federal government is the state.
Okay, for that, I think we have to go back to what it necessarily means to be state. Isn't okay for my conception of that. Like the state has, like you said, like it is an instrument of power. Now, I think for a state to be a state, it has to have, going back to like the point you guys were making earlier, like the military. That's the enforcement, the arm of enforcement of the state. Because again, that's another thing. Like I think like a state has a mandate on violence. Like it has the monopoly on violence. Now,
if people are sorry, you go.
Yeah, no. If my conception of the state is true, like that has to be somewhat eliminated because I think for me, the state is that. Like, it has the monopoly on how to delegate, how to govern, and how to met out violence. Now, if we were to wither away the state and only just have, like, these... Because not necessarily, going back to the point of, like, it's not disagreeable that we should have a fire department, that we should have, like, hospitals and sort of the thing. Now... if we wither away that state where it has to, kind of get into all these apparatuses of governance and instead, put the people in, in charge of these, smaller institutions, I would guess and say that is the withering of the state. Now, does that necessarily mean that governance is out? No. That would be just left to, the localities, just left to, for example, the firemen would govern over themselves, not be, not have the state over them, not have the state mandate or force them.
I feel like you would have to have, because the problem is that there's a divorce between the people and the state or the government, as it is now. And if you turn it into where the people actually are the government and they actually do make the decisions on what happened in the government, because there would still be a monopoly of violence that exists, but it would reside within the people, which, if that's the definition that we're going off, then the people become the state. The reason... And I think that I don't really think that, there's a difference in what we're saying. I think that it's, we're just saying two different ways of, we want the state as it is instituted now as being divorced from the people. We want that to change because, there's no problem if the people of the government, because, that's like saying, I'm my own president, or my mom is the dictator of my house, that's fine.
There is, an essence to that,
That's the way that I use it, I think that there are ways to, alienate, I guess, the bad parts of the state, because I think whenever we complain about the state, we complain about the state in the way that it's implemented now, because it's divorced from the people. And perhaps even in the way that we're talking about it, there won't be an exact representation of people in the government, because, I don't know, I don't know if you can get 360 million people to do that, but I think that you can try and get as close as possible, and I think that that's the problem, is that some people are okay, I think we should basically just have a better socialist state that operates kind of still a little bit more similar to the way that our state works now, as to where I think that anarchists, I don't think it's that we don't want a state. It's just that I think that we want the state to become synonymous with the people. Because I don't have a problem with the people governing the people. People should be in charge of themselves.
I mean, I think like that is somewhat like a good rough approximation of like what it means to like wither away the state, I guess. And I mean, yeah. So I mean, if we were to posit that, then I guess right after the Soviet Union was instated, like I guess they didn't just go that way. Because I mean, Lenin did have libertarian socialist like tendencies in his early days, so maybe he kind of had, thought about that. But again, yeah, like it is still somewhat of a loaded take, and I think we should have that as a somewhat ending point for this second episode. Does anyone else have like any additional idea or
None that like immediately spring to mind. I feel like pretty good like discourse over all that was said.
Yeah, it seems like that is it. It was just like a very loaded thing. I think that. Do you have anything else, Noah, that comes to mind, or?
No, I think we had a good discussion.
Yeah. So, Alex, any other last points?
Society is a scam. Everybody should go Amprim because eventually we'll just all die of corona and then global warming will stop.
I agree. We should all go Anprim.
Alright, so since everyone who has ended up listening up to this point, you heard the boys, go grab an axe, go grab some matches, get the fuck out of your house and start, burning some wood because you're going to be living out there for a whole. Embrace it.